Hello again, and welcome back to whatever this is that we're doing on Sunday nights. We've kind of shifted around with the series that we've been doing, and we're going to shift yet again this evening. Uh, as you might recall me talking about in the past, I started these Sunday night reflections videos mainly for my own selfish benefit. I wanted an avenue to be able to process and to think out loud about things that were really important to me. And from what I recall, I started thinking out loud about spiritual practices. It's probably getting close to a year ago now. And then we shifted gears and went into spiritual self-care, which is basically just an expansion of spiritual practices where we looked at just really practical things like doing the dishes for the sake of self-care, finding a habit, and spiritualizing it. So we went in that series beyond just kind of the traditional prayer habits and practices, and just kind of it was more all-encompassing. And then we shifted gears and we've gone into this series on Episcopalian identity, and we've not been here very long, but I would like to shift gears yet again. There's two reasons for it. One, and this is the most important reason, is that we have a lot of folks who are not Episcopalian who are tuning in, which I'm really grateful for. It's really wonderful. And I don't want those folks to feel kind of excluded, right? Because they're not Episcopalian. And I know many of them are very happy to learn more about the Episcopal tradition, but what if I want to think more in terms of the whole audience and not just kind of the few of us who are Episcopalian or flirting with Episcopalianism, right? So there's ways of going deeper and engaging in a deeper way that would connect with more people, with all of us, right? And then two, I'm also doing confirmation class with some folks right now, and I find myself repeating myself a lot. And the people who are doing confirmation have really dove into the deep end and are very excited to become Episcopalian. So they're like really engaging all the stuff that they need to for confirmation, and they're watching all the videos. And I just want to bore them out of my church after they've just started, right? Because I'm repeating myself constantly. I don't want them to feel that way. So maybe I can put something else out there that is just as engaging, that it also comes from within our tradition, but it's more universal in scope. That's the goal. So for the next several weeks, what I would like to do is focus on just reflecting on some quotes from some great thinkers from Christian history, saints and mystics. And in my experience, we don't dive deep enough at all into this great tradition that we have as Episcopalians, but I think just the church at large. I find that there's some things that the church fathers, as they are called, the church fathers and mothers, there's some things that they have written and they have said and they have preached that are really radical. And it comes as a shock whenever people actually engage with this stuff. And they're like, where has this been all along? And why aren't the priests and the ministers in my tradition teaching from this? We're claiming to be traditional. We're claiming to be rooted in history. Yet where is this content at, right? Things would look different if we actually took the whole of our tradition seriously, as opposed to just kind of handpicking the things that we like most, right? And so that's what I want to do, is kind of expose all of y'all who are tuning in for this to some radical ways of thinking that are there at the heart of our Christian tradition, it found within the greatest saints and Christian thinkers that we know. So for the first several weeks here, I want to park it on one person. We'll probably shift gears and go to another person who came right after this person. But the first person I want to engage with is St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas probably had the greatest influence upon not just the Christian tradition in general, but like the Western world. He's one of the greatest influencers, whether we know it or not. It's either him or Augustine, and people debate. I tend to think Aquinas had a greater influence, but people could think I'm wrong, and that's okay. Plenty of other people think I'm wrong about all sorts of things, and it doesn't bother me. So, and that's not a thing I'm willing to debate on. It's not a hill that I would like to die on. So, yeah. But a few things about Aquinas that kind of shed some light on him. I'm going to do about just a brief survey of things that are interesting to me about him. I'm not going to try to sum up his whole life story, his whole history, but I'm trying to keep these videos within 10 minutes, and I'm at 5 minutes already. I think I'm going to fail at that one this time. But so Aquinas was a Dominican. He was a Dominican priest. He was within the Dominican order, and much to his family's dismay. Actually, his story could actually be made into a movie. It would be quite interesting, I think. So his parents were not thrilled that he wanted to become a Dominican priest, Dominican monk, and give his life to the church. They had other plans for him. So much so that his family actually kidnapped him and locked him in a room in their house for a year, trying to dissuade him from going down the path that he was going down. But his sister finally let him loose, and he went down the path that he went, which is interesting in and of itself. There's a few things that are also really interesting about him, as he was a champion of this philosophy called scholasticism. He wasn't the only one, but he was a major champion of it and kind of a major forerunner for it. And which was a major paradigm shift in the way that the Christian tradition at that time thought, the way it engaged the world intellectually. So prior to the time of an era of Aquinas and much of Aquinas' influence, the ancient Christians were really steeped in the philosophy of Plato. So everything was, Plato was a major figure for how they philosophized and theologized about things. I'll just put it that way, put it as simply as I can. Some people were more influenced by Plato than others, but there was definitely Plato's shadow was over the whole church at that time for the most part. And then in comes Aquinas, shaking things up, in many ways, kind of rejecting what had come before. Not outright, but it was definitely doing something new and something different. And if you're acquainted with the Christian tradition at all, you know that doing something new and something different, that doesn't bode well for many people. Doing something that's not traditional tends to get people in trouble. And one of the things that Aquinas was really seeking to do was to reclaim Aristotle and prioritize Aristotle's way of philosophizing and making it more accessible to the Christian tradition, and trying to kind of cut ties a little bit with Plato's way of thinking. And as if that wasn't radical enough, the even more radical bit was that Aristotle was doing so, or not Aristotle, forgive me, Aquinas was doing this, redeeming Aristotle during a time when Aristotle was really hot, I'll say it that way, in the Islamic world. So the Islamic world had rediscovered, or discovered really kind of for the first time in many ways, and in many circles, the influence of Aristotle's philosophy, and they had adopted Aristotle's way of thinking for their own way of doing philosophy and theology in so many ways, right? So as if it wasn't radical enough that Aquinas is adopting and embracing this pagan philosopher, he was doing it at a time when the Muslim world was really all about this pagan philosopher as well. So it got him into all kinds of trouble, so much so that people would come and protest outside where he was living and riot and all of this stuff, and send him death threats and things like that. And then another part of his story that's also really fascinating. So he was a tremendous thinker, a genius, brilliant thinker. He was a philosopher, a theologian, but he was also a mystic. And towards the end of his life, he had some sort of encounter. Something happened to him mystically, where he, as the story goes, encountered Christ in some profound way, where he, after that day, gave up his whole writing, academic, intellectual project altogether, and it silenced him. When asked why, he said, everything that I've done up until this point seems to me as if it's nothing but straw. In other words, it's just his experience of Christ, whatever that was enough to make him feel like he, as out of all of the words that he has written and all of the brilliant things that he didn't even come close to scratching the surface of it, which is really profound. Yeah. So I would like to focus on some of his quotes and reflect out loud with you all about some of them in the next few weeks, and then we'll shift gears into somebody else. But with all of this said, and his kind of life's trajectory and some of the things he did. Again, it was like that was like the nutshelliest of the nutshelliest of summing things up, right? It was very brief and wasn't nearly an adequate summary. But you understand where this quote is coming from, I think. He wrote that every truth, without exception, and whoever may utter it, is from the Holy Spirit. In other words, he did not contain the fullness of truth. The tradition that he was a part of did not contain the fullness of truth. But whoever utters truth, without exception, is doing so from the Holy Spirit. In other words, all truth is God's truth, whether that truth is found from within my tradition or outside of my tradition. And whoever may utter it is uttering it from the experience of the Holy Spirit and the influence of the Holy Spirit, which is quite radical if you think about it, because we Christians are not good, have not been good at playing nice with each other, much less other religious traditions. But here comes Aquinas, guns blazing, saying it doesn't matter if it was a Buddhist or a Baptist or a Catholic or an unchurched, dechurched, atheist person who said it. If they're speaking truth, they're doing so from the influence of the Holy Spirit. And we should recognize that and celebrate that. Quite radical stuff, right? Written quite a long time ago by a saint in the church. It makes you scratch your head and wonder, where has this way of thinking and way of engaging the world been for hundreds of years now? But yeah, and how differently things would have looked in our world had we taken to heart this quote. And he's not the only one that said such a thing. There's plenty others, actually. This is a pretty pivotal line of thought in a lot of the writings of the saints and the mystics and the church fathers and mothers. So the challenge that we have before us with this quote is, how often do we recognize truth when it's not people like us who are saying it? And when it's not people who are coming from within our fold, right? Our comfort zone who are saying it? Do we recognize the divine presence's influence when it comes from other traditions and other ways of life, other ways of thinking? And it really affirms in some way, years ago, or when I was in college, the big thing was all paths lead to God. I actually don't agree with that one, because I don't think that all paths lead to God. But there's another way of saying it that I think really comes to the heart of what Aquinas was saying. It's not that all paths lead to God, but it's that God is mystically in all paths. So God is not contained to any one of our traditions, and it's not as though God isn't doing something major in our own tradition and special, but we are foolish to think, if we were to think, that we've said all there is to say, and we've got all there is to have of God, right? God is not confined in the ways that we tend to want to box him in, or her in, however you want to say it. So yeah, the challenge is, do you recognize truth when it comes from somebody from outside of your tradition, whether that's your churchy tradition or your philosophical tradition or your political tradition, right? Do you recognize all truth as God's truth? Something to think about. See you next week. Peace.